How's it going, everybody? Thanks for coming to my talk. I appreciate it. My name's Dan Olsen, and today I'm going to be talking with you about how retention drives growth. I won't go into a long background of what I do, but these are some of the companies that I help out. I'm a product management trainer and consultant, and I help companies like these build great products and strong teams, so B2C and B2B, large companies, startup companies. My Twitter handle is @Dan Olsen. And my website is just dan-olsen.com. I post my videos and slides up there. Basically what I help all these companies achieve is product market fit. So product market fit was actually coined by Marc Andreessen way back in 2007 in a blog post that he wrote. So Marc Andreessen obviously invented the Netscape browser, famous venture capitalist these days, and it sat in obscurity until the lean startup movement. And it's interesting because it's a popular term, but it hasn't really been that well defined. And so that's basically, I was fortunate as a consultant working with so many different product companies and teams to kind of come up with a model for how to achieve product market fit. And that's why I wrote the book, The Lean Product Playbook, which is basically a guide on how to achieve product market fit when you've got a new product or a new feature that you're trying to go from idea all the way to, what's that?
Awesome book.
Oh, thanks, man. Appreciate it. Thank you. So I thought I'd just start out with a question, a specific scenario that I think comes up a lot. So we're all constantly launching, not constantly, but a lot of us are often launching new products, right? So specifically in that scenario, I want to pose a question to you all that if you've just launched, like say we just launched it an hour ago, and now we got to figure out, we can focus our time on acquisition, we can go all in on acquisition, on optimizing acquisition, we can go all in on optimizing conversion, or we can go all in on optimizing retention. And we got to pick here. So I'd like some audience participation. Just think about which of these three you would want to focus on if we had just launched our product. Who would want to focus on acquisition? Okay, who would want to focus on conversion? And who would want to focus on retention? All right, cool. So retention looks like this is number one, conversion is number two, acquisition number three. So yeah, and obviously, if you hadn't just launched your product, the answer would definitely be it depends, because it depends how are we doing on acquisition, conversion, retention right now. But when you first launch a product, it's usually, usually there's a certain set of circumstances that exist. And so the other way I like to do this is, let's say, we launched our product 12 months ago, or in January, yeah, about 12 months ago, right? We launched a product and somebody else we launched product A, somebody else launched product B, which product would you rather own? If you look at this is an active users graph over time, right? I want you to think about which one you know. Now, it's a trick question because the two graphs are actually identical, right? So good. The people with the keen eye are people are looking to see if something, they're identical, right? And so this happens a lot where people focus on active users, right? And you may have heard of the term vanity metric. This can be a vanity metric. It's an easy trap to fall into. So what I want to do now is remind everybody that active users is actually the sum of two different metrics, right? We can think about our users. I mean, you could just look and say, hey, how many people, blindly look and say, how many people came this month to our product? But really, if you look a little more nuanced, it's how many people came, new users, who came for the first time. These people showed up for the first time this month. That's what I mean by new users, versus returning users. Yeah, they came this month, but we know that wasn't the first time they came and used our product, either with login or cookies or something like that. That's how we tell, right? So that's a key difference. Let me go back and show you these two products now, showing the two components of active users, new and returning, right? So here we've got product A. Basically, blue is new users, and red is returning users. And if you add them up, they add up to the same number for both products. Now that we've broken it down, who would like to have product A as their product now? Who would like to have product B as their product now? So I'm preaching to the choir. That's great, right? So obviously, product A, they're probably doing a good job on acquisition and conversion, right? But what's going on? Each year they got to fight for new users and get new users because they're just not holding on to that many. In contrast, product B, they're not crushing it as much on acquisition and conversion, but because they're holding on to a higher percentage, their user base is growing, of returning users is growing over time, right? And the way I like to, the way to kind of explain this, because I think the best model or framework is the leaky bucket analogy. So who's heard of leaky bucket here? A lot of people? All right, cool. Again, I'm preaching to the choir. All right, cool. So the leaky bucket analogy is basically, we've got a bucket, and the amount of water in the bucket is our active customers, our active users, basically, right? And unfortunately, everybody's bucket is leaky. We all know we don't hold on to customers forever. So if we go with this metaphor, what is conversion? Well, the way I like to think about conversion is if the water in the bucket is our customers, then conversion is like we're spraying some hose at the bucket like this little kid. The water flying by the bucket is prospective customers. Some of it goes in and gets converted. Some of it doesn't, right? So our conversion rate is what percentage of the water do we get into the bucket, right? Does that make sense? That's conversion. How good is our aim getting into the bucket? What is good conversion like? Well, great conversion looks like this. All the water is getting in the bucket, right? 100% of the water is getting into the bucket. Well, with this metaphor, what is acquisition? Well, acquisition then is just, well, how much water are we spraying through our hose at the bucket? Basically, what's the volume of water? What's the volume of customers? How many prospects are we reaching to try to convert over time? And what does great acquisition look like? Great acquisition looks like a fire hose, right? It's like tons of people, become tons of prospects coming through your conversion channels, hopefully getting converted. And then finally, what is retention? Well, retention then is just what percentage of the water do we keep in the bucket over time? That's basically what retention is, right? Tracking, once the water's in the bucket, how good a job do we do holding onto that water over time? And this is what great retention looks like, right? All the water stays in the bucket. We have no leaks in our bucket. Sadly, even the best products in the world don't have this, right? You'll see in a sec, I'll share some real data. You always lose. I mean, at a minimum, people pass away. Credit cards expire, their needs change, they deliberately leave, things like that. Now, like I said, active users is a sum of new users plus returning. And so the challenge is, if we just look at active users like that graph, we constantly have new water coming into the bucket. So it's really hard to tell what's going on with the level of the bucket, right? That other graph that we were at, it looks like the water level keeps rising and rising and rising and rising. That's because we're putting more new users in every month. So someone could just look at the bucket and go, wow, we're doing great, right? So in order to really understand how we're doing with retention, we got to turn off the faucet, right? I'm not saying you stop acquisition, but you analyze the data in a way that effectively turns off the faucet and says, let's just pick a period of time, let the water come in the bucket, and then we're going to act like the faucet's turned off, and let's just track how that water drains out over time. How quickly does it drain out over time? That's basically what retention rate is. It's a very formal way of doing this, right? It's a way of tracking repeat usage, right? And another part of my book that I talk about is, for me, repeat usage is the essence of product market fit. That's how you know you basically have product market fit, right? I want you to think about for a minute, think about like the number of movies you've seen in your life. Probably hundreds, maybe thousands of movies, right? Now just think about the number of movies you've seen, say, 7 or more times, or 5 or more times. It's a lot shorter list, right? Those are the people, when you try it and you see a movie and you like it, you're going to go back and watch it. Same thing with restaurants, right? That's the essence of product market fit and retention rate, basically, right? No matter how good a job or bad a job we do in acquisition or conversion, if somebody gets in there and kicks the tires on our product and it meets their needs, and then they log out, they're much more likely to come back and use it. If in contrast, say we do an amazing job with acquisition and conversion, but then the product doesn't meet their needs, they get in there and they realize, oh, this doesn't meet my needs, or the value's not there for what I'm getting, basically, then they're not going to come back, right? So that's all retention rate is. It's really a way to formally track that repeat usage over time. That's what retention rate is. And the graph usually looks something like this, basically, where you've got percentage of users over time. So we're picking a certain set of users, certain time period, and we're putting them in the bucket. And we're saying, okay, let's just stop the faucet, turn the faucet off, and see how they drain out over time. So you can think about actually this as being the water level of the bucket over time, right? It started out at 100%, and then we just watch how it drains out. We're just plotting how it drains out over time. So what is this graph saying? It doesn't even go to 100%, does it? Why is that? Well, what that's saying is basically you start with day 0. Unfortunately, 80% of people never came back and used this app again. This is real data for an app, right? I could have drawn the graph all the way to 100%, but we just would have had a lot of white space that would have made it harder to read the graph. So usually people just truncate the y-axis scale with whatever day 1 retention is. So sadly, this is real data. It means 80% of people never came back to use this app. And this is for a mobile app. And those of you that work in mobile know how brutal it can be, right? That's why what's the first thing a mobile app does when you launch it, right? If you just told me about some cool app and I installed it and I played with it and then I closed it and I put it in my pocket, what are the odds I'm ever going to remember to go back there? That's why what's the first thing that they do? They go, hey, please turn on push notifications so that you can remember that it's sitting there in your pocket, basically, right? So then it keeps decreasing and it, the slope finally flattens out, and then one of two things happens at the end. It either flattens out, as I've shown here, which is a nice scenario, or it actually goes to 0, right? And most products, it goes to 0, unfortunately. I've worked with a lot of clients, and the first time we start tracking retention, their hearts are broken when they see, maybe it takes 7 days or 14 days or 30 days, but they see, wow, we're just not holding on to as many customers as we thought, right? All right, so if you do this, over time, you're going to, be analyzing a bigger and bigger and bigger bucket. Someone on your team may then go, well, Dan, our product is a lot better than it was 6, 12 months ago. How can we analyze how it's, changing over time, basically, right? We don't want to put everybody in one bucket. That's where cohort analysis comes in. And all cohort analysis is saying, you know what, instead of putting all of our customers in one bucket, let's have a few different buckets and compare the retention rate across those buckets, right? And the most common way to divide your user base is by the month that they signed up. So a January cohort, a February cohort, a March cohort. But you don't have to do it that way. It can be by acquisition channel. It can be by any other customer segmentation criteria you want, right? But when you have more than one cohort curve, retention curve, this is what it looks like. So we've got 3 cohorts here. And what I want you to do is think about which cohort would you want to be your cohort if you were the head of product marketing or product management for this product, okay? So think about that for a sec. We've got cohort A, blue diamonds, right? Cohort B, red squares. Cohort C, green triangles. And you see week, percentage of users returning, weeks since sign up. So who would like to have cohort A? Who says, I want cohort B to be my cohort? Who wants cohort C? Did you guys have a secret meeting at lunch? Okay, when Dan puts the slide up, vote C, everybody vote C. Why did the wisdom of the crowds here, why did everybody pick C? Over time, you retain more customers, okay. Sometimes somebody says it's got the highest rate. I'm like, well, this is the highest number out here. So we got that. Anybody else got thoughts on why they picked C?
Probably higher satisfaction.
Higher satisfaction, okay. Lowest drop. Yeah, sometimes people look at the drop between here and here. Sometimes I get area under the curve, a very advanced integral calculus kind of answer. That's pretty cool. But the bottom line, I think, is what this gentleman said, is just, hey, if it flattens out at the end, I want that number to be as high as possible. That's kind of the Occam's razor simplest explanation. It's not about the drop or the area under the curve or anything like that, right? It's just like, hey, if it flattens out, it's great that these guys start out higher, but at the end of the day, I want to hold on to as much water, as many customers as I can, right? And in other talks that I give, I talk about how to use qualitative data to try to validate your product before you launch and after you launch and things like that, and how to kind of improve your product market fit. And every once in a while, that's not satisfying enough for someone because they're like, well, how many users did you talk to, Dan? I'm like, I talked to 20 users. And they look at me and they go, that's not statistically significant. I'm like, you're right, it's not. How many should I have talked to? And the person said 1,000. So then I was joking with them, like, are you sure that's enough? And they said, 10,000, yes, 10,000. So I'm like, okay, how long would it take to do 10,000 one-on-one user interviews? So that's not that, the idea of qualitative talking to small groups of users sometimes isn't that appealing. I talk a lot about the Oprah versus the Spock technique, where Oprah is all about the qualitative and Spock cares about the facts. So the good news is for the Spock quantitative people out there, this right here is a direct measure of quantitative fit. It's behavioral. It's not attitudinal. It's not people telling you, like NPS saying, would you recommend it? It's not CSAT, people saying I'm satisfied or not. This is, did they actually come back or not? This is a methodical way to track behavior. Did they actually come back and use it again and again and again? Which, again, I believe that deliberate repeat usage is the ultimate, that's the core of product market fit. This is tracking it over time. So if it goes to 0, sorry, you don't have product market fit. If it flattens out, the higher up it flattens out, the more product fit you have. That's basically it, right? So the big takeaway is if you're not, who's tracking retention already today? All right, cool, that's great. So if you're not, then you want to start tracking retention because you really don't know. And if you tie it back to what I said before, you could be spending all this time and effort on acquisition conversion, and does it really matter at the end of the day if you're losing all that water? You don't want your curve to look like that curve for product A that I showed you, right? Anyway, that's the idea. And I like to show, I like to back this up with real-world data when I can. And so I'm excited that I actually have some real-world data that somebody shared from the Android App Store. And here they have 4 cohorts. So they have, again, percentage of users remaining active over time. They've got days since app install here. And they did the cohorts in a very specific way. What they did is, for that time period of the App Store, they said, hey, you know what? Let's take the top 10 apps, and let's have that be a cohort. And that's the red line. And then he said, let's take the next 50 apps, and not including the top 10, and make that the orange line. Then we'll take the next 100, take the next 5,000, right? So that's how they did it. And you can see it totally backs up what I was saying, is the more successful apps, the ones that have the highest product market fit, are the ones that have the highest terminal value of that retention rate, right? The interesting thing is even the top 10 apps on the Android App Store, after 90 days, what are they looking at? They're looking at like 55%. What does that mean? Even the best apps in the Android App Store lost 45% of their water of their customers in 90 days, right? So it kind of gives you a benchmark. I'm sure there might be some apps that do better and things like that, but it gives you a benchmark. It's really tough to hold on to customers over time. And then the other thing is look how quickly it drops off, right? So if terminal value at 90 days is about 55%, down here we're looking at 35% for the next 50, just the next 50, not that many more, right? It's like, drop of like 10 percentage points, right? So 55 to 35, 20 percentage points. And then it quickly drops again for the next 100, and it quickly drops again for the next 5,000. And I think if you took the average of all the apps on the App Store, what would it be? It'd probably be 0 or just a little bit above 0 because most apps on the App Store, unfortunately, don't have product market fit, right? The other thing that's really important about retention, if you realize that we've got these retention curves, you can think about like, if I'm holding on to 2%, let's just say like it flattens out at 2%. Each month I'm holding on to 2% of the users that I acquired and converted that month. You're only going to build up your user base at that 2% over time. It's gating how quickly you can grow your user base. To see that graphically, here's what we can do is we can take the retention curves month by month and just stack them, right? So that's what this is showing. Each of these little bars is 1 month's worth of users stacked up. Well, the problem is we keep losing all the users, so the stack up ends up just being like that. It ends up limiting your top line growth that you can have. It's a mathematical formula. So, you can do the best job you want on acquisition and conversion. If you have a very leaky bucket, you're going to be constrained like that. Give me a sec here. Awesome. And just to throw it up, this is basically, what I was saying about quantitative SPOC versus qualitative OPRA, right? And they're both valuable. Before you launch, you want to use qualitative because you don't even have quantitative yet, right? And if you're in a big product where you can do A/B testing, then sure, you can do some A/B testing to an existing base. But if you're launching a new product and you don't have an existing base, you basically want to use qualitative. And then when you do launch, then go to quantitative. And the key framework for my book is basically the product market fit pyramid. I don't have time to get into it today. I just want to show the picture real quick. But it's a way to think about what do you need to get right in order to have product market fit, right? You need to basically make sure, and the way to think about this is the 5 key hypotheses that you need to get right enough. You don't have to get them 100% right. But you basically need to have a good handle on who's our target customer. You need to have a good handle on what are their needs, and more specifically, their underserved needs. We don't want to launch a product that's going to, try to address needs that they're perfectly happy with today. And those are the market layers. And then your value prop. That's basically what needs are we going to promise to our customers that our product delivers on, and how are we going to be better or different than the competition, right? That's really important for product strategy and marketing strategy. And then your feature set or functionality, that's what delivers the benefits. And then finally, user experience. And so product market fit is just, hey, we're making all these decisions and execution up here in the top 3 product layers. How well is that resonating with the market that we have? Cool. And then the other thing, obviously, is, retention impacts lifetime value, right? If you're holding on to people more often, then we're going to basically have a longer lifetime value, right? And so lifetime value, I'm sure a lot of people here are already familiar with it. For those that aren't, it's how much, if you look at each customer and say on average, how much money do we make over the lifetime of a customer? It's basically a formula of average revenue per user times the average customer lifetime times the gross margin, right? And so it's that average customer lifetime. If you can hold on to your water longer, you're going to be able to monetize it for longer, basically, right? So ARPU, I'm sure you've heard that term, average revenue per user. It's just for a given month, we can take the total revenue divided by the number of users or customers. Customer lifetime, that's how long your average customer generates revenue. It ends up being 1 over your churn rate. That's a quick hack. So again, those of you in SaaS know that even small, because of that 1 over term, even small improvements in churn rate can have nonlinear improvements in lifetime value. And then finally, gross margin is just some percentage of how much we're actually making off the revenues, basically, taking out of the cost of acquisition. So, there are a lot of complicated ones out there that have cost of capital in there. So I won't go into that. But basically, there's one other thing I wanted to show you real quick, which is, when you have an improvement, small improvements in churn can have really big improvements in the lifetime value of your customer. Let me find this real quick, guys. It's there. I thought I had a graph that actually showed it, quantified it, so that it's basically nonlinear, right? If you have a really big improvement, small improvements in that retention rate and churn rate can have really big improvements in your lifetime value customer because of that 1 over term, basically. So, All right, cool. So let me get to the punchline here, which was basically we go back to that question that I asked at the beginning, is if you had to decide what order to optimize retention, acquisition, and conversion for a new product, basically not for every product. Obviously, one thing I didn't cover is if virality is very critical for your product, you might want to focus on that first. But assuming that's not the case, if you just launch your product, I think for most products it makes sense to first optimize on retention, second, conversion. And you're not going to get it leak-proof. We already showed you even the best companies have like 55% 90-day retention. But shore it up, do what makes sense till you get to the point of diminishing returns. Then focus on your conversion so that when you do spend your time and effort on acquisition, you're going to get a lot higher ROI because you're going to have a better conversion rate and a better retention rate. I also want to share with you all, I run a monthly meetup down in Silicon Valley, down at Intuit's headquarters in Mountain View. Every month we bring in top speakers. I've been doing it for almost 5 years. So I know we're at a growth conference. I'm excited that tomorrow night I'm going to be hosting Eric Bodick, a friend of mine, who's the co-founder of Pendo. And he's going to talk about product-led growth. So you may have heard the term product-led growth or product-driven growth. This is a new, exciting topic that you're hearing more and more about, where instead of sales teams being the one driving growth, it's much more about how can the product kind of itself drive growth between what we're doing inside the product itself. So anyway, if you want to learn more and sign up, you can go to meetup.com/lean-product. Again, that's Thursday night in Mountain View. We have spaces left if you're interested. And with that, I have a couple minutes. I probably can take like 1 or 2 questions if you want. There's how to get a hold of me. Happy to connect on LinkedIn. And happy to answer a question or two in the minute or two we have left.